You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing, a podcast for progressive club leaders ready to increase their club's revenue. Time for change begins right now. The essence of a private club is uniting people with shared values and passions. When a club fails to connect with these interests, its future is at risk. Today's clubs face a critical challenge, balancing new member values with cherished traditions. In this episode, Dr. Bonnie Knutson, hospitality professor at Michigan State, joins me to explore where tradition meets tomorrow and what clubs should focus on in the years ahead. What are the top clubs doing that underperforming clubs may not be doing? Well, hard to say for sure, but behind every successful club is effective governance. At least that's what Club Benchmarking confirms in its recently released report on club governance. In this episode, we're talking to the author of Club Benchmarking's 2025 report, Joe Abely. Joe and I dive into the numbers, and his suggestions may make club leaders pause and reevaluate their current practices and policies. So coming into the year, I didn't really envision doing as much on club governance as I have, and yet exceptional governance is at the heart of a club that has a healthy culture, a healthy staff culture, and a healthy member culture. And that's so important because without strong culture, clubs are really going to struggle to attract the right members. You know how it goes. Word gets out on the street that things are messed up over at that club, and all of a sudden, it's a lot tougher to attract the right members. But what makes the difference between clubs that thrive and those that struggle? Since 2017, Club Benchmarking has been conducting governance surveys to understand what separates those high-performing clubs from the rest. And the numbers in their recently released survey show a striking correlation between governance practices and financial performance. Clubs in the top financial bracket consistently show stronger board performance in every category that they measured. What's particularly interesting is how leadership stability plays into this equation. So my guest in this episode is Joe Abely, an executive consultant with Club Benchmarking. Joe is a CPA by trade. He did his undergrad at Boston College. He got his MBA from the Wharton School of Penn. He was a board member at Braeburn Country Club in West Newton, Mass. for 12 years. He also served as treasurer for 6 years and president for 3 years. On top of that, he served as chairman of the nominating committee for 10 years. So talk about a guy who did his time. Joe also enjoyed a 40-year career as partner in a major international accounting firm, and he served on a number of boards for publicly traded companies, private equity groups, as well as nonprofit organizations. And somehow, Joe, with all that he has going on in his life and all that he's done, he's found time for little old me and Crushing Club Marketing. But here's my conversation with Joe Abely. Joe, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah. So, all right, I just have to ask you, you've been doing these surveys since 2017. Like, what are there any trends, or what have you noticed, things that are in common or difference? Like, how has the survey changed over the last 8 years, or what are the trends you've noticed?
So the surveys originally covered a whole bunch of questions. They went to GMs and board members and talking about, things such as, does your cash flow cover depreciation and debt service? Is there balloon payments in your debt? Level of debt in relation to annual operating dues. Board terms, how people are elected. So both financial and qualitative questions regarding governance. And we did that for a number of years. And then last year, we decided, okay, there were kind of three themes: nomination and succession, strategic planning, board education. And every time we asked those questions during the surveys, there was fewer clubs had good best practices than had good best practices.
Right.
And it didn't get any better. Did it get any worse? No, but in all of the things that didn't pan out, nothing improved.
Hmm.
But as we looked at this, there were those three things that seemed to drive everything. So the nomination and succession report that we did last year, only 22% of the respondents reported that they had an effective succession planning process. 22%.
Wow.
And
Right.
it's just a continuation of those types of answers that we've had over the years.
Now that's industry. That's for all the people. And how many people were surveyed?
So we sent it out. This was more GM focused for this year's survey.
Mm-hmm.
We got directionally 530 responses from about 400 clubs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's statistically significant.
For sure.
We've had upwards of other surveys, 1,500 respondents from 1,000 clubs, but a meaningful number of answers.
Right.
And you do it based upon, Club Benchmarking maintains a contact list of all the general managers in the country. So all the general managers in the country and in Canada,
right,
got the survey and had an opportunity to respond to it.
Got it. So that 22% though is based on all the people who were surveyed, right?
Yes.
How does that change when one of the things I thought was really unique about the survey is the way you broke them down into kind of like their financial performance, I think.
Yes.
How did that change depending on the three segments that you had broken down?
So for this year's survey, again, we didn't really cover nomination and succession. That we dragged that in based on last year's report.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to go to the part of the report where we measured the respondents. So we had, of the 400 odd clubs, we had 350 clubs that we had financial data.
Mm-hmm.
And we broke them out between the top 25, 25th percentile, middle 50, bottom 25.
Yep.
And in all of the categories, and the board performance outcomes that we identified were, does the board govern effectively? The board members put club interests above personal interests. The board operates in a strategic manner. The board focuses on policy, strategic direction, and oversight, and delegates to and empowers the GM to make decisions on day-to-day operations. New board members are adequately trained to contribute early in their term. The board receives adequate training on club governance and principles. So survey-wide, does the board govern effectively? 42% agreed, strongly agreed. The ones in the respondents in the top 25th percentile of financial results, that jumped up to 76%. But board members putting club interest above personal interest. Original answers were 37%, jumped up to 53% for the top 25%. The club operates in a strategic manner. Only 33% said they strongly agreed that their club did. The top 25%, it was 64%.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a cause and effect here.
Yeah.
Do they let the GM do their job? The original, everybody answered 44%. It jumped to 78%. Now, on the two questions concerning training, education and training, the original answers were 22% for each. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they jumped up to only 39 and 38% respectively for the top 25%. So that just tells you that in the industry, board education and training is a need.
Yeah. So why though? Why does this continue to be problematic, do you think?
It's not built into the culture of it's not built into the bylaws or the I don't want to say culture, that's kind of the wrong word. It's not just part of what they do. It's not ingrained in the board structure or board committee structure. Now, as a board member and now as a consultant, and empathizing with general managers, having too many committees doing too many things can be disruptive. Those are operating committees. So I'm not a proponent of adding committees.
Right.
However, governance related, which the board owns, I believe, based upon the research, that you do need committees and people that own and it is ingrained in the process. That's different than culture. Ingrained in the process, so that effective strategic planning is on everybody's radar, whether you're in the strategic planning process or not.
Right.
Nomination and succession is so important to the future of the club. And then board education. I mean, I've witnessed board members that, you know, they don't know a lot of things about how the club is structured financially. It was stunning to me in the survey that while everybody thinks that providing education on the club industry and how the club benchmarks against the rest of the industry is important, very few of them did it. And I'm going, man, you know, and not only do you have that information from club benchmarking is available, that the CMAA provides a lot of this stuff. If you have an accounting firm that is knee deep in clubs, they provide this stuff. The information and data is there. You know, I just it's not ingrained in the process. Bylaws can be much too long and have too many operating requirements in bylaws. You know, that said, that you have a bylaw on my nomination and succession, you should have a charter that outlines what your practices are, that then keep in mind the bylaws, but also provide continuity for this year's nominating committee and future years nominating. You know, board education, you know, not only board education, Ed, board evaluations. Only 24% of the respondents to this year's survey do self-evaluations. Where they do self-evaluations, the results are good. There is a cause and effect, but only 24% of them do a board evaluation.
Yeah.
And we do that. KKW does that. You know, I'm sure there are governance people at clubs that can help a club do that. But clubs need to look in the mirror every once in a while.
So that the board evaluation is one thing. Are there other specific, like so often it's hard to, you know, I know it's hard to tell, like what are they doing differently than we're doing, and we don't do those things but it's like the, you know, the devil's in the detail. But are there other specific governance practices that the high performing clubs are doing, you know, in addition to board evaluations, that maybe some of the underperforming clubs are doing that you know of?
I think, to me, it comes back to where you have an effective and robust nomination and succession process. Solve that, you solve a lot.
And just to say a little bit more about that, Joe, like, what does that mean? You know, because people say, well, we have a succession plan. I mean, this is how our board works, and then every couple of years, you know, whatever. But when you talk about that, I sense that there's more to, it's not just like, who wants to be on the board this year? Let's go out and find a couple people that we know that we like and have them on the board. Like, what's the next level down, or maybe 3 levels deeper of that, to really make sure you have a really tight nomination and succession plan?
So it's funny that in the past surveys, including last year's, only 50% said that they had a succession planning process for board members and officers. Only 22% of those said that the process was effective. So it is self-reported in the industry that there needs to be work done. Not Joe Abely's opinion or Club Benchmarking's opinion. It is what the respondents self-reported. You know, I think it's something for education for board members that can be done somewhere in the industry, that how you do it. Like I said, I've seen clubs, one in particular, it starts with getting members on the committee. It is a board-driven responsibility involving the general manager, involving the committee chair. You get the right people on the committees, and then the process becomes kind of evident as people, some people go on committees, they show up. Some people go on committees, they work really hard. The ones that work hard will eventually become a committee chair, and that's, how they get in the board. That's how you become the president, the treasurer, and the secretary. I don't want to say it's overly simple, but a lot of complaints that I hear from clubs is, we can't find anybody that wants to be on a committee. We can't find anybody that wants to be on the board. It's recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
You tap people on the shoulder. I mean, if you're a committee chair and you're the general manager, what families down the pool are more involved than not.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of look around and say, that person would be a good committee member. And because the general manager and the management team know the members better than the board members do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a very important source in recruiting. But it's just that simple. You ingrain it, and even at my own club, that there were years where the committees weren't as stocked as they should be because we didn't recruit.
Right.
We let them be stocked by the committee members and
Sure.
volunteers. It's kind of that simple.
Right.
And I see nonprofits that do the same thing, where they have advisory boards, young professionals that join these advisory type things, and that's where you pick your board members from.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of can start, a lot of nonprofits will stock committees with non-board members. So it's recruitment. It's
right.
I
Very
guess
intentional recruitment.
Yeah. And if I were going to maybe use one word of everything I've learned over the last, so if I've been between my own nominating committee and then being with consulting on our own, then with club benchmarking, purposeful recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
And then people will realize, the education that needs to take place. Education is huge, because the board is responsible for compliance. I don't see any compliance committees on boards. I don't. Now, I've used keywords with about 1,100 sets of bylaws. Not perfect, but I didn't see any.
Right.
I'm going to give an example. Most private clubs are 501c7s.
Right.
Very tight requirements about types of revenues, lobbying, those sorts of things. It is not the general manager's responsibility to be a 501c7 expert. I like to recommend that if there is a accounting firm that does clubs and 501c7s, they should be doing yours. That's
Mm-hmm.
not always the case. Who on the board is making sure that we're in compliance?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody. But it's a board responsibility.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, and I'm sure there's a rabbit hole in that discussion, but
Yes.
then we can really go down, right? But so when you think about board education, what are the, in addition to compliance, what is that information that's so important? Like, so often, people say, oh, well, you might hear people like, yeah, we do our board retreat every year, and we go and we talk about, whatever they talk about, but we go for a day and we spend this time talking, but the act of it is fine. But if you're going there and you're not focusing on the things that are going to move the needle, then why do it? But from your experience, what is that type of content that they really should focus on?
So I'm going to, this is in the report. It's a bit of an eye chart.
Okay.
And I'll tell you what it is and then give you the percentages. All board orientations, they go over your legal responsibilities and all that stuff.
Mhm.
All right. 85% provide bylaws, articles of incorporation, and other document. Every board member should know what's in the bylaws.
Mhm.
Club rules and regulations, 83%. Board policy manual, 80%. Not all clubs have board policy manuals. I believe they really should.
Right.
Org charts, 79%. Only 78% provide an annual budget.
Hmm.
Only 75% outline the committees, descriptions of purposes and responsibilities, charters, and committee assignments. You got to know what the committees are doing.
Right.
Only 71% give the most recent audited financial statements. Down the list, only
Right.
66% give internal financial statements reflecting results versus budget.
Mhm.
Only 59% provide board objectives for the year. We recommend there should be an annual charge at the beginning of the year. This is what we're working on as a board.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think only about half of people do that, but
Right.
only 59% give them out. Membership data, including census dues and fees, only 56% provide them.
Right.
Board documentations for the previous years, 56%.
What do you
Strategic, and so you get down, and here's the one that kind of blew my mind. Long-term financial plan, only 31% provide that as part of the materials they give.
Right.
That's mind-blowing.
Why does that happen in your professional experience and talking to, both being a member, and a club leader, and also in your work, what gets in the way? Like, why does that happen?
It's not ingrained in the process.
And where does that come? Is that's a board thing? But if boards are turning over all the time, how do you change that?
I think education by the industry.
Mhm.
Somebody in the industry needs to own it. I think general managers should be also educated on it so that they know.
Mhm.
I think it's just education. I think making sure that board tenures are longer than not is important. I think making sure, clubs likely have people in the membership that are governance. There's got to be one governance expert in the membership.
Right. Yep.
Maybe that's something that either have it on the board or have it available to the board, somebody within the membership to provide that.
Right.
But people don't know what they don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that goes back to ultimately who's accountable for that. And I'd love to tackle that, but I also, I want to just talk about the terms, because before we started recording, you and I were talking about board terms and things like that. It's like a chicken and egg thing in a way, though. It's like, and I'd like to hear and maybe share with our listeners your perspective on board terms and what your belief is about that. But if you make that change beforehand, you might have the wrong people serving a long time as board members as well. But yeah.
Well, you're governor there. So the recommendation is, based on the data that I've seen and what I've observed at clubs, having a maximum term for board members of 2 3-year terms provides the best results.
Mm-hmm. And what do most do today? What do most do?
44. So most do 3-year terms.
1 3-year term.
1 3-year term. 44% do 2 3-year terms, and that's an increasing trend in that direction.
Okay, got it.
And that's from our surveys, we see that. If you happen to have the wrong person in for the first 3-year term, you don't renominate them for a 2nd-year term.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of being purposeful of the people that you're putting on the board, the thoughtful nomination and succession planning process. With 2 3-year terms, you get a good continuity of knowledge, good continuity of institutional knowledge. Mm-hmm. You stagger those terms. You get to do succession planning. Most clubs select their officers from among the board members. That's typically how it's done. So, and it's not too long. You're not, I don't think 2-3 year terms entrenches people. You know, 3 years goes in a flash.
Right, right.
You know,
I mean, it takes you the first year to figure out what you're doing.
Even if you provide all of the information and then have content of your education, you're going to get it. You're going to absorb it. You're going to go. Your head's going to spin, even if done right. Yeah, it's going to take you a good year.
Right.
You know, the board meetings that when we did our old surveys, we used to ask, all right, what percentage of the board time is spent on operational matters? What percentage are spent on strategic matters? Strategic manners. Well, you'd have like 50% said operation. Well, that's not what the board is there for. That I preach that if you have a robust budgeting process and goal setting, and you're on plan, then you don't need to spend a lot of time talking about French fries at the board meeting.
Right. Yeah.
That you don't need to spend a lot of time on, why are we doing aeration now? Things of all operational stuff that's being handled. And if things go off kilter, then yes, there is a discussion that needs to be had and a remediation. But the board is there clearly for oversight, but they're not there to operate.
Right.
They're there to set the strategic direction. The consultant that I've done business with for a period of time has a nice chart that shows the front, equates the demographics of memberships as front 9 and back 9. Back 9 members. All right, I'm on the back 9. I'm one of those guys that wants everything, doesn't want to pay for it, and chats a lot.
Right. Yeah.
But that if I'm on the board and I need to be thinking about who's going to replace me. So I always say, my kids are grown and gone. When Susan and I leave, that's 2 of us going out the door. We dine, we play golf. The people who are going to replace us are in their 40s. They got, 2.8 kids. They're active. What are the kids' programs? What's at the pool? What's at the tennis? All that stuff.
Right.
Even though I have white hair, I got to be thinking about those front 9 people.
Right.
And that's all strategy.
Right. So, all right. So this is actually, I love this conversation from a execution standpoint, because a lot of times, I mean, I'm a small business owner, and I think that a lot of times people, you say, I need time to think ahead. I need time. Like, I need that space. Now it's not just me sitting in a room, like thinking like, but a lot of it, there's so much more to that. Like you're saying, which is like, what does succession look like? Who are the people that we should be talking to? What does that look like? To me, that is so much more. And I think what you're saying too, I guess what I'm trying to do is bring life to what does that mean to like think forward and strategic thinking for board members, because so often what you do see is board members that are trying to solve operational issues, right? And it gets into these conversations. Well, we got to do this. We got to do this, instead of really focusing on that. But then why does that happen? Like, is it a lack of confidence that someone else is going to be able to execute those things? Is it there's probably a myriad reasons why that happens, but it's like that meddling that, you'll see, in many cases boards get into in that way, instead of really focusing on governance, right? And compliance and all those other things.
So I'll tell you something that came out in the survey that I sensed was true. And, the data came back. I'm going to go to it, but it's the general manager's tenure. Now, I can tell you at my club, I'm sorry I keep bringing up my club, that we are on our 3rd general manager in 33 years. First guy was there 22. No, he wasn't the first guy, but one of my memory was 22 years. The last fellow who I hired was there 10 until he retired.
Right.
The fellow that's there now is in his second year. He was the assistant general manager, gets full access to CMAA training, does all of the local CMAA stuff, really knowledgeable person, gets supported by the board. And the data that we came up with, executive committees, sorry about that.
No, it's.
But I want to make sure I get it right.
Yeah.
General manager's tenure. Respondents reported the tenure of their general manager as follows: 19% 1 year, 19% 2 years, 12% 3 years, 10% 4 years, 5 to 10 years, 22%, more than 10 years, 18%. Then when we cross-reference the results for GMs with a tenure of 5 to 10 years, 72% of respondents that the board governs effectively, which is more than the group. For GMs with a tenure of greater than 10 years, not only did 71% report the board governs effectively, but other performance outcomes increased significantly. Now, this is an opinion I put in, right? I said perhaps an indication that longer tenures give GMs more sway with the board. And I think tenure, and that means, so GMs report to the board, or they report to the president of the board, or they report to the president. They report, but who's mentoring this person? Who's making sure they're coming along? I think that rapid general manager turnover is a detriment to a club.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that correlated to financial results. That when you were in the bottom 25 percentile, they were more apt to have short general manager tenure.
Yeah,
that to me, it's intuitive, but the data now shows that general manager tenure goes a long way to success.
Mm-hmm. Now, does that, let's just say you've got a general manager, though, that's been at a club for 15 years, but the governance is not great. And, but maybe they perform well. I mean, is that, maybe it's an anomaly, but it's just like, is it maybe sometimes the board and the GM just sort of figure out the dance and the roles and responsibilities, and they just figure out how to execute it, even though it might be really dysfunctional?
You'd probably find, again, this is probably an opinion because I haven't tested that. One is probably the size of the club. Bigger clubs, I believe can cover more sins, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just kind of more,
right?
There's
like
more money,
right? Things going
there's
on,
more discretion if they've got plenty of capital money coming in, if they're keeping up. At the end of the day, if you're not generating enough capital income to fund your debt and fund your obligatory capital and your aspirational capital, all the governance in the world isn't going to do anything for you.
Sure.
I would say there's probably a healthy respect. I would say that probably the nomination and succession process is a little bit better in those clubs.
Mm-hmm.
That memory is, when I go back and look to where clubs had an effective nomination and succession planning process, they tended to be in club benchmarking parlance, green bucket clubs, the top 25% financially performing clubs.
Mm-hmm.
Had some of the attributes where there was education. They had strategic plans that were effective.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get down, they have funded long-term financial plans.
Mm-hmm.
That's been something that, going back for us back to the early 2000s when we put one in, but clubs that have one where you stick to it, you're not just funding a project, you've got a whole plan. Right. And by the way, when you have a long-term financial plan with all the money, you put it in front of the membership and show them visually, mm-hmm. This is why we need to raise this much capital income, because the club consumes capital.
Mm-hmm.
The typical club is 11, 12% of operating revenues and depreciation. You got to fund that.
Yep.
And that doesn't that doesn't take into account a new grill room, new traps,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
that sort of,
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. All right. So I just had some tangential thoughts around that, but I won't spin us
yeah,
down
yeah,
that
right.
digression on some, member meetings with financials and people, all they can think about is I have to wait too long for something or something's not right. They're not really,
So
but
I'll tell you something though that's interesting.
yeah.
We did a strategic plan. Our club in the culture is adverse to debt. We pay as you go.
Hmm.
And we were doing all of this stuff on the campus, everywhere, soup to nuts.
Mhm.
We did it over a period of 6 years. Paid for it out of cash.
Hmm.
We put it in front of the membership, and when you saw that they were going to put a new tennis hut in year 3, the membership saw the tennis hut in the plan. You got buy-in.
Hmm.
So when they saw what they wanted in the plan, and then they go, there were a couple of things we're not going to do. Here's why we're not going to do it.
Right.
And you communicate to the membership, you let them ask questions, and that takes care of all the rumors. It puts everything out.
Yep.
And for most clubs require votes for big items. It
Right.
just makes getting the votes so much easier.
Right. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's kind of how we started, right? I mean, so there are a couple of things I'd love to talk about that, is a way to move our way towards not keeping you here all day. But I feel like I could sit down and talk to you for hours about some of this stuff because
Oh
I
yeah.
find it fascinating. Let's talk about strategic and long range planning because, it seems like there are a couple ways that the clubs might do this. One is like, you hire a consultant to do a long range plan, but it's more like a vision instead of a plan, and it's like, and one of the things I wonder in your travels, what you see where people are playing a long game with something and saying, this is where, really good board succession seems to matter to me. It's like the board sets a vision and it's each board member's responsibility over time to get to that vision, right? It's like, we're going to set a vision. How are we might not get to that tennis hut, in the next 3 years, but it's like, hey, we know if we do these things, we're going to get there. Right. And it's like, let's really just be mindful of like the destination and make sure that the officers and the board members they're held responsible to help us stay on track so that we continue to get there and then set the next vision. Is that kind of how you see it? And if not, I mean, what, and are clubs working that way?
There are some clubs that do that. You do a strategic plan. It takes you out X number of years.
Mm-hmm.
It is, I did a blog, God, in 2018. Why do strategic plans sit on the shelf?
I'm gonna go find
And new administration, new GM, new president, as opposed to you do a thoughtful strategic plan. And it doesn't mean you have to hire a consultant.
right.
To me, it's important you have somebody come in that's in the club world that can kind of guide you, not give you the answer, but guide you.
Objective. Yeah.
And that then you come up with a plan that includes membership surveys, focus groups. And by the way, when you have a strategic planning committee, this is just from a sample size of one. Don't have a board member on the strategic planning committee. Have it independent because they don't have stuff in their head that you do.
Right. Yeah.
And then they present something. The board member approves it, but then that strategic plan is ingrained in the agendas that boards will have going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So back on our strategic plan was implemented over the terms of 3 presidents.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and then when you get done doing all that stuff, then you do another strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think you always have to have a long-term strategy that, everything in a club isn't linear. It goes up and down and up and
Right.
down and up and down. and that, you do all of this stuff, then you don't have to do something for 5 or 6 years, but you need to be thinking about it.
Right.
Um,
What's the right president term, do you think? I mean, do officer terms matter to you as much as board terms? Or
I know that we're working on what is ideal. I think a 1-year term, absolutely, because if it doesn't work out, then you vote him or her out. And it's somewhere between 2 and 3 years, 2 or 3 years in that spot.
Got it. So for the president.
For the president. And,
Okay.
the one club I've referred to that does things recruiting starting at the committee level, their president can go even longer because they have a process in place. Again, 1-year term. So if it doesn't work out or they want to jump out, then you have that mechanism. But I think 3 years.
So you're saying 3-year commitment, but a 1-year term, if it doesn't work out, they can get ousted.
Yeah, I mean, almost.
Or they can bail.
Or they can bail. That 1-year terms is healthy.
Yeah.
That's how most clubs do it. It's a 1 year, 1 year for the
renewable.
president, treasurer, vice president, secretary.
Got
it. Sometimes treasurers and secretaries, if it's provided for in the bylaws, they can go on for, I went on for 6 years as treasurer.
Yeah.
And I think that having that, a few people with real institutional knowledge is valuable.
Right.
But again, the 2-3 year terms helps solve some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I like 3 years for president. Some people will argue 2 years, but it isn't 1 year.
Yeah.
And in yacht clubs, as I've observed, that you start as a flag officer and make your way up to Commodore. They're all 1-year terms, or a lot of them are 1-year terms. Well, you 1 year and then you're gone. But you need your president to be a consensus builder.
Yeah.
And
so 3 1-year terms. Yeah. I mean, the thing about a 1-year term in general, it seems like that does serve it almost seems more like a vanity title than a long-range strategic planning type of role and responsibility. I mean, if you have 3 1-year terms, if I'm going to be president for 3 years, I'm thinking long-term. I'm not thinking about what am I going to do in the next 12 months. And oh, by the way, I'm shut down for, 4 months during the winter or whatever, it's like, you got to be thinking long-term if you're going to be there locked in for a few years.
And that's the job of the entire board.
Yeah. Right.
Committee in my view, each committee doesn't have to report at each board meeting.
Right. So, it's interesting. So to me, let's go back to just like, how do you change this? Is one of the things we were talking about earlier. If you are a club that has 1-year terms for your officers or for your president, the idea of trying to create, and let's just say your board has 1 3-year term, the idea of making a significant change around, nomination succession, strategic planning, and education, I mean, really making a move on those is really pretty tricky. And it would seem like that would have to come, I mean, this is just my opinion perspective, it would have to come from the general manager and someone who's been there who says, hey, listen, if we're going to make some change, this is what I think we need to do. And I'll lead it. Right. Or something like that. But if you have a president with a 3-year term and boards that are successive, 2 3-year terms, you've got a chance of really implementing long lasting change, assuming everyone is on board. Is that fair?
For the work I've done in my little piece of what I do for club benchmarking, I was brought in by the president at the encouragement of the GM at the encouragement of the president, but the GM and the president were on par. They were singing from the same hymn book. They each saw in terms of, education that was necessary, what messages needed to be delivered. I saw they were in sync.
Hmm.
And I think if they're in sync, which they need to be, they work, they work together.
Right.
And that it's interesting. This came out in the most recent survey that general managers are referred to as general managers, GM, COOs, GM, CEO. But functionally, the general manager is the CEO of the club.
Hmm.
That's the same as an executive director at a nonprofit.
Yep.
And that the chairman of a nonprofit or the president of the club sets the agendas, provides mentoring and guidance, manages the board. President generally knows a little bit more than everyone else, but
right.
And to me, because I'm a CPA by training, so budget time is always time I get to be a nerd and be a deep dive and be a nuisance to whoever I'm working with.
Right.
But you come up with a good budget and a good plan, you don't need to do anything else. Because even if, there's an old saying that a CPA said to me, that you're sitting in the meeting and people are wondering why the fertilizer budget is up for this month.
Hmm.
Well, it's on plan, but just it was either too hot, too cold, too dry, too wet.
Yeah.
As long as you're going to be on budget, we're on plan for goals. So it's budget for the financial piece, but it's what are we trying to accomplish this year? You don't have to,
dive into that one.
And even discipline. I mean, I've serious matters, clearly it's a board issue. 90% of the stuff, 95% of the stuff can and should be handled by the general manager, unless it's really bad.
Right. Well, right. Maybe it's legal. It's something that's, catastrophic or whatever. Right. I mean, that's
whatever. But, somebody wore denim into the clubhouse, that can be handled.
right. So when I hear you say that the GM and the president were singing from the same hymn book, it really, because, you could hear that and take that a couple different ways, I would imagine. But it's that the GM, if I understand you correctly, the GM has the green light to run the club.
And that too, yeah.
And the president is there supporting what they do rather than the other way around. The board is going to run the club and the GM is, going to do what we tell them to do.
Yeah, I mean,
that way.
I'll put it another way. That my observation in the clubs I've been in is the GM respects the president and the president's role. The president respects the GM and the GM's role.
Got it.
And they got it. And it all comes back to when they call me in, there's something that isn't working in the bylaws, or there is a need to start thinking more strategically. It kind of always amazed me that looking at data, the vast majority of clubs break even from an operational perspective.
Sure.
So, you're not going to build a clubhouse, purpose it for weddings, and make money.
Right.
The data over many, many years suggests that, and that you're not going to be able to fund your depreciation nor fund your debt service out of operations. Yet there are clubs that think they can do that. That one blows my mind.
Yeah, right.
And that's kind of a continuity point of view.
Yeah.
I mean, the use of debt in clubs is, I think, has become problematical for a lot of them.
Yeah. In what way? I mean, just that they're running up too much?
So what we've seen is that debt used in conjunction with a long-term funded plan can be appropriate to help you do something significant. Recognizing that debt service at the end of the day needs to be paid for by the members.
Right.
One way or another. But that what we've seen, what I've seen, is that they take on too much debt. The terms are too long, so that, clubs undertake significant capital projects every 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
That means you need to have your debt wiped out in 10 years. Well, now we're seeing more of an incidence of 25 to 30-year amortization periods with 10-year balloons. That keeps the payment down.
Mm-hmm.
When I used to sell cars, I used to help people bring the payment down by tacking on months onto the car loan.
Right.
So you get to the end of 10 years, you've got 70% of your debt still outstanding,
Mm-hmm.
and your future board is hamstrung.
Right.
You can look on the jobs on the website. Dave Duval from Club Benchmarking just did a couple of studies on debt that have kind of uphold all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
If everything done in my, I guess one of the things I should do is sit down and write down the top 10 things that the club needs to do. Having robust nomination succession planning is one.
Mm-hmm.
Effective strategic planning is two. Effective board orientation and education is three. Having a long-term funded financial plan is critical.
Yeah.
So on down. I got to sit down and write that down someday.
I'll read that blog when you write it. There's so much. So just try to a couple of questions, and I'll thank you for your time, because this is really awesome, really insightful, and the report is fascinating to go through. And I've actually read it twice, and I'm still trying to absorb all the information in there. But what is the, I guess, not to be the gloom and doom thing, but I'm a fan of the boiling frog analogy, and I've used that a couple of times. You know that one, right? And sometimes I wonder, like, is that what the outcome is? Like, if clubs can't figure out a way to address some of these, just say the four things you just mentioned, if clubs can't figure out a way to get on top of some of these things, does it ultimately make clubs less interesting? Does it lead to culture problems? Does it lead to financial issues as well? I mean, what is the outcome if clubs don't try to address some of these things?
So that's an excellent question. We have not had a recession in the club business since 2007 and 2008. I was on the board, a treasurer of a club in 2007, 2008. When we used to get together with area clubs, we get the president, the treasurer, and the GM. The meetings got really big, because you're sitting there, what are we going to do? It wasn't quite Armageddon. We're lucky in the greater Boston area that, everybody did just fine. But we haven't had a recession. The COVID thing, the government kind of bailed out a lot of clubs.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a recession, and you've overbuilt the facility, you've taken on too much debt, you're not funding your depreciation, that will come home to roost. We 25% of the clubs are what we call green bucket clubs. They're growing, it's purposeful, they're healthy. Kind of 50% are in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got those are yellow bucket, and then the red bucket or the one. It doesn't take much to move from a green bucket to a yellow bucket.
Mm-hmm.
I would be worried if there's a recession, and there's a lot going on out there right now from a macroeconomic point of view that, people are, initiation fees are going up and up and up. Healthy clubs have healthy waiting lists. What happens if there's a recession? You get through those waiting lists pretty quick.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I do worry about, I'm concerned about that.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that if you have, more purposeful strategic planning, better board orientation, education, and better nomination and succession, it doesn't guarantee you anything, but it makes you better equipped to handle some of those things. Your decision-making processing is maybe a little bit sharper. Your ability to navigate might be a little bit better. Is that fair to say that? Or
That's fair to say. And that intuitively, if you've got a board that's educated, they're the right members, they're there for a meaningful period of time, the chances of the entire board being engaged and not just leaving it to the president or a few increases the chance. And having the right people with the right, we're against saying, all right, we need a restaurant owner on the board. We need a this on the board. We need a that on the board.
Right.
That said, recognizing that somewhere between the board and committees, there are some skill sets that the board can call on to help is important. Having a restaurant owner, I don't think is that's not a criteria. Having a CPA is the treasurer is not a criteria.
Right.
It could be somebody that's a CFO of a small to medium-sized business. It's the best person with the most knowledge.
Right.
And not just, all right, we need we need this.
Right. An industry expert to do something. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Boy, well, Joe, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing so much of what you have in this report. And I've got to believe the industry thanks you for this as well. And because it's just such great data and information to be able to reflect upon. And
yes.
Boy, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it too.
And thank you for listening. If you find episodes like this helpful, be sure to share it and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using. Until next time, keep crushing your club marketing.